Dear Frank Kelly, I am the 56-year-old housewife with the weak hair, bunions, varicose veins, false teeth and bad sight, necessitating very thick lenses, who wrote to you a couple of weeks ago. I told you of how I met a man in McDonald's in Dublin and how he persuaded me over a cup of coffee to go to London for a day trip in his private jet, and how this led to an involvement with his revolutionary group and finally to a romantic entanglement with his friend Giacomo, who owns a helicopter and who imports what he describes as medicines into Dublin. I told you of how I pointed out my obvious physical defects to Giacomo, who is dazzlingly handsome and only 36 years of age, while I am 56, but that he told me that my varicose veins reminded him of his father's vines in the old country. Well, Frank, since that time his compliments have become even more lavish. Recently he told me that my bunions reminded him of the Easter rock cakes which the old women used to bake in his village when he was a child. When I pointed out my weak hair, he said that it reminded him of a beautiful type of bog cotton which used to grow in his native marshes. It seems that I just can't win. Then I told him that I could not see him again because Dada, that's my husband, was getting suspicious at the frequency of my walks into the Dublin mountains, where I was meeting Giacomo and going for short trips with him in his helicopter. But he just became jealous and buzzed the house in it, as I think the expression goes. And Dada said, "That'll be Granarty's next door with their bloomin' electric drill." And I was certainly relieved that Dada is a little hard of hearing. I can tell you, Frank, that he was more than a little puzzled when he discovered next morning, going out to the garage, that every growing thing in the garden was squashed down flat by the downdraft of the rotors. After this, I decided to finish with Giacomo for good, whatever the consequences, and I told him that I was falling asleep at my Altar Society meetings because I was not able for such a pace of life at my age. My family, which I told you includes a priest, 2 nuns, a doctor and a politician, were becoming very worried about me and insisted that I go and see our GP. He was very puzzled. At first he thought that it might be anemia, but there was no sign of this. Little does he know that it was jet lag from flying all over Europe. I should explain, Frank, that after the incident of buzzing the house, our cat disappeared, and I received a note through the door in Giacomo's handwriting saying, "Meet me in the mountains if you want your cat back alive, Giacomo." What could I do, Frank? I didn't know what Giacomo might do to Brezhnev, that's the name of our poor pussy, so I walked to the mountains where I met him, and in no time at all he persuaded me to go for another spin in his helicopter, and we landed in the Midlands, where there was a big private jet waiting on the estate of a friend of his. In no time at all we were airborne again, and by midday we were over the west coast of France. We landed in some country place where there was a meeting in a farmhouse of a lot of foreign men in dark suits with mysterious bulges under their right armpits. Giacomo said that all I had to do was mind his briefcase. I can tell you that it was a heavy one, Frank. Giacomo said that he had to leave suddenly in the middle of the meeting because he had received an urgent business message, but I certainly didn't see him receive one if he did. But then my sight is not too good. Anyway, when I went to take Giacomo's briefcase, he said not to worry, but to leave it under the table. He didn't like it anyway and was thinking of buying another. I thought this strange at the time, but I didn't pursue it because Giacomo had been behaving so strangely of late. Well, Frank, we had only reached the gate of the driveway on foot when the entire house went up in the air in one huge explosion. Giacomo said that there was no point in going back because we would only get in the way of the local firemen, who were bound to have seen the flash anyway, and we flew home in the jet in time for me to make the tea for Dada and the family. I had forgotten to get the sausages, but Dada didn't question this. Maybe it was because I looked so tired. Well, Frank, After this, Giacomo became very nasty, saying that we were in some sort of trouble after the farmhouse meeting and that I would have to go with him or there would be trouble for me and the family. This terrified me because I had visions of Father Mhaelroon, that's my son, finding out. So there followed a succession of day trips to Europe, with I can't tell you how many briefcases and explosions. I can tell you, Frank, that I was getting very suspicious that there was something very fishy going on. So it was a great relief when Giacomo said that our relationship would have to end, as he had to leave Ireland in a hurry for some South American country, which he said had no extraversion treaty or something like that. Anyway, this accounted for the jet lag when I visited the GP. Fortunately, I got Brezhnev, our cat, back safe and sound, although I think Dada, that's my husband, had his suspicions, because Brezhnev was looking very frightened for a few days after his ordeal. Also, Dada was getting very worried about my constant walking in the mountains. He was telling all my friends that I would walk myself into the ground if I wasn't careful. And he was very alarmed when he was told that I fell asleep across the table with my face in the cold, wet clay at our clay modelling class in the community centre. I made one final trip to London with Giacomo for a farewell dinner at Claridge's. I had to tell a white lie to Dada to do this, saying that I was taking part in an all-night vigil with the nuns. And I felt very guilty, Frank, I can tell you, when Dada just smiled and said, there would be fewer assassinations and bombings in the world today, Mama, if people just minded their prayers like your good self. Anyway, after the dinner in London, where Giacomo insisted that I drink some wine instead of my usual still orange, we went along to a club where we met some Arab sheikhs, and one in particular took a great interest in me. We chatted quite a bit, and I also met an old English public school type who had worked in the British Ministry of Defence during the war. It was a bit boring really, Frank, but you can imagine my surprise, Frank, when thinking that I was finished with my guilty past. I opened the post the other day to find 2 letters, one from the sheik asking me to be his concubine, and the other from the old English public school type saying there was a 5th man, you know, working for the Russians. Sir Alfred Blunt had their story wrong. I am terrified, Frank, because they both said that they would write again, and I have to get down to the post first every morning. Dada said for me not to bother getting up when he heard the postman the other morning, but he nearly died of shock when I stood on his chest in my haste to get out of the bed and down to our hall to get the post first. I am on a fair dosage of Valium, Frank, and I will keep you posted on any further developments as a warning to other bored housewives.